What's going on? It's your boy. So I'm here in the car, just left work, and I was thinking about some recent news I saw on my timeline. And of course, if you're interested in hip hop, pop culture topics, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. I'm gonna start introducing more topics like this on the channel. But the real reason we're addressing today's topic, which is the very simple yet stupid reason that Adam 22's podcast is going broke. Okay, and so it's going to be surrounding around hip-hop culture, not so much Adam. I don't know much about him and his lifestyle or whatever, but I do know about the podcast and the blog and how hip-hop blogs and podcasts tend to relate to one another. So the key thing is I want to address the obvious is that he made a recent video explaining what was going on with his podcast or company's financial situation. But the thing that I think we should really focus on is not so much that they're going broke, but more so how they went broke, okay? Now, we can point to many reasons as like mismanagement of finances, maybe, just the environment. We're just not checking for content that they're making, whatever reason you can come up with. But one of the reasons is what I want to focus on in this video, and that is the foundation of your audience. That's the very first thing we're going to address, and then the second thing we're going to address is educating your audience. Okay, so if you're new to this channel, then I will explain further, but for those of you who have been here on this channel, the key thing that I've always been repeating is that you as a fan as well as an artist of either hip-hop or any music genre need to be educated. You have to be informed on the purchasing decisions you're making. You have to be informed on the conversations you're having around music and music business. And you have to be informed about who you're entering and exiting within your network. Now, for you new people, what does that mean? That means that if you are a fan of hip-hop, or if you're a fan of any genre of music, I use hip-hop commonly because that's just my favorite genre, but this really stands for any genre of music. If you're a fan, then you have to be very, very, very informed on who you're going to be supporting as far as what type of music they're going to be making, what type of messages they're making, and why they're making their music. So many of the times you'll see people gravitate to people for their location, like they're just from a place. And that's one of the first things I noticed was a problem with the No Jumper podcast, was that it was pretty West Coast based, which is cool, because I like the idea of supporting local artists and things like that. But the problem is that you put yourself in a box when you apply many other, I guess you could say, characteristics to that demographic. So what then happens a lot of times is people will be like, oh, we're only for real Californians or real West Coast rappers or real West Coast artists. And now what does that mean? No one knows. Not one person is going to define it, and not one person can. And so now you run into the issue of, well, we want to be mainstream with our audience, but we're only catering to a West Coast style or a West Coast lifestyle, okay? So that's one of the first things that you're going to notice with the issues that come along with the timeline of No Jumper, is that they're basically surrounding a culture or lifestyle that's very niche, but they pursue a more mainstream audience. So the problem now that you're going to have is, well, what within the lifestyle is attractive for your podcast, for your audience, for the people who are just tuning in? Like, for example, I'm from the East Coast. So most of the podcasts I was watching was, let's say, like Drink Champs or Cameron and Mace's podcast and things like that, and many other East Coast things like that. But it only really resonated with me when the conversations were surrounding music business, musicianship, and music culture. This is where the second issue, or the second part of the first issue, that No Jumper runs into. The musicianship was not a priority. The actual musicianship of the artist that you're bringing on was not a priority. Now, what does that mean? That means if you were to bring me on your podcast, let's remove No Jumper, just any podcast for that matter. If you were to bring me in for an interview, what would you bring me on there to talk about? So those of you who know me, you know that I am into music, you know that I'm into fitness, and you know that I'm into food, and you may know that I'm into gaming and other technological engineering and cool sciencey stuff like that, right? But if you don't know me, then you would have to consider, well, what do I present myself to be, okay? And then you can kind of maybe create interview questions to learn more, or maybe then you can choose to do more research as a platform or a podcast or a blog to then present information to your audience that will be valuable to them, okay? Or just entertaining, if that's your goal, right? So what then happened with No Jumper? They began, again, focusing on the West Coast lifestyle, introducing artists and maybe celebrities and things like that. But what kinds of things were they covering when those people arrived? Well, if you were to take a first glance, just a first glance, you don't know what's going on, you just want a snapshot of the story. At first glance, it's gonna be very little to do with musicianship, very little to do with the music business, and more so to do with business politics within the music industry, which again has nothing to do with how well you rap, how, well you play your instrument, how many gigs you got coming up this year, how many records you're gonna sign. It has very little to do with that. But the questions they were asked about were perhaps about relationships, friends, and then when, of course, the conversation went into crime, then you started to have conversations about that and jail culture and things like that. Nothing to do with musicianship on what is supposed to be a musical genre focused podcast. Now, this is where the second problem arrives for the No Jumper podcast. And this is, again, another very simple yet stupid reason for your platform to fail. The second reason is that you are not educating your audience. So here, this is where I learned myself. I learned that when I was posting all my music videos and just, posting me playing the piano or playing the guitar and stuff like that, that was cool for y'all to watch, but you wouldn't stick around because there was no value past that. It was very surface level. So once I learned that, I realized that the people I surrounded myself with were typically other musicians. Other musicians don't like to really watch other musicians play unless they can learn something. And I know that from going to school where you would watch older musicians or very experienced musicians play. And that's all we would do. We would just pick apart their performance or try to learn how they played something or maybe how to improve on what we witnessed and heard. I'm doing the same thing with this channel. I'm realizing that there are a lot of artists that may want to learn from me, or maybe I want to learn from them. And then I'm just conveying the message to people who may know less than me or may want to know more than what they already have in their head. Okay. So that's what I mean by educating your audience. Why would you do that? The reason you would do that with your podcast is because it creates a higher quality expectation of the value you give. So let's say this was a financial podcast and I'm telling you how to make a budget, right? Eventually you'll get it. You'll make a budget and you'll successfully have a budget. What's next? That's where I have to take initiative to find the next problem you may have or the next obstacle you may run into and actually provide you information to either overcome it, be aware of it, or be aware of your other options. I'm saying all this and you will never hear this come out of your favorite podcast if their goal is for entertainment. If I wanted to entertain you, educating you is still key. The reason it's still key even in entertainment is because if we sit here and talk about, let's say, dating or relationships, you're not going to have a valuable conversation, or you're going to wind up having the same conversation because you're not learning new information to either solve a problem or be aware of problems. So let's bring it all back to No Jumper. Why do I say they're not educating their fan base? Because of the first problem. The foundation that they're basing a lot of the guests, a lot of the topics, a lot of the work that they consider products has very little to do with giving you value as a music fan or as a musician. So what does that also mean? That then means that whenever you tune in, 90% chance you will be going for entertainment, which is fine. But again, without any value being added in the entertainment, meaning if you go to a strip club, you're there pretty much for the excessive femininity, the food, the culture of, being catered to by the waitresses, having alcohol available, of course, the music. That all comes into fruition for your entertainment. And the only reason that's valuable to you is because you can't get it anywhere else, right? And so this is what they leaned into, which only exacerbated the problem, because the people who look for entertainment that wind up getting no value from the entertainment will begin to crave value. And because you lack it, they will walk away and just look for value elsewhere. So now you have season after season, episode after episode, interview after interview, and it, based on your foundation, has very little to do with music, and then also has not educated your fan base since its conception. So now, after years of work that you've been putting in, you've been paying people, you've been buying equipment, you've been keeping up with the blogs, you've been making money, you don't know how to invest because you have a terrible foundation. Your foundation is based in entertaining people without educating them. So therefore, your investments will be in doing that better. You will not invest in actually educating your fan base because you don't know how. You will not invest in getting artists and musicians to have conversations about being an artist and a musician for the sake of being an artist and musician, because you just don't know. So that's all without adding in your personal beliefs. This is before we get into who you are religiously, who you want to date, your sexuality, how you feel about the world as a man. This is just based off of just how I've observed your podcast function within the music industry, okay? So how can you correct this? You can correct this tomorrow if you do two simple things. You need to adjust who you bring on your podcast and why they're there. If the only reason you decide you want to invite somebody to have a conversation in front of you is because they have something that is salacious or popular or moving the needle going on, you need to sit with your team and consider whether or not that is worth your future. That's the first solution to the first problem. Now, what does that look like? So the next gang member that comes up to you asking for an interview, ask them, well, seeing that you want to be on the show, why do you want to be on the show? And if their answer goes anywhere from music or musicianship, selling a record, talking about a music video, promoting a record label, or helping artists, you need to really consider whether or not that is valuable to your audience. And if you think that this guy getting on your platform to talk to you is going to be valuable to somebody like me, I want you to really think about that and write it down too if you need to. Your second solution, and this will solve all of your problems, you need to make a curriculum. You need to make a curriculum for your audience. You need to figure out by the end of 2025, what does your audience need to learn about you and get from your podcast that will make their lives better. It doesn't have to be something that I approve. It just has to be real. And all that really could come down to, I'll give you an example and you can take it. I don't care. I will give you an example. You need to teach all of these people who come onto your hip hop podcast how to rap. And what does that mean? That means just because you turn a beat on and you rhyme doesn't mean we will say that's a good verse, okay? So you need to start judging, criticizing, critiquing, and providing some kind of rubric for people to learn and improve their skills. That's just one example. If you don't want to choose rapping, then you need to teach your audience something. You need to figure it out. Learn how to solve problems for your audience. I'm doing this to save you. If you don't want to do it, fuck it. But again, this is just my perspective on the very two simple yet stupid reasons No Jumper in any hip hop blog is stagnant or failing or broke or struggling to get views right now. Those are the two reasons. If you don't believe me, try what I'm telling you for 2 years and see what happens. Try for 2 years to actually solve your audience's problems when it comes to the artists that watch your shows, and actually invite guests that want to talk about music, okay? And if you don't believe me, try it for 2 years. And if your podcast still sucks and we're still saying it's trash and we just want to see you with OnlyFans girls and rappers that are about to go to jail, then I want you to continue doing what you're doing and see, just face the music. It is what it is. But that's what I got for you guys. If you enjoyed this, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. I don't really like doing these car talks, but this is the only real way I could get something on my mind out very quickly. So we're going to be doing this impromptu. Just, you know, it's kind of cool to see the different backgrounds and things like that. But if you agree with me, let me know in the comments, why do you think you enjoy rap blogs and hip-hop blogs? Does it have anything to do with the adjective rap or hip-hop? Let me know.